Hello and welcome to the Hardcore Soft Skills Podcast. This is Yavi Caro. In each episode, we delve into a different skill with the help of an expert. After each episode, you can start applying what you have learned to advance in your career. I believe soft skills make hard skills work. Today's skill is storytelling. No, this is not going to be a show exclusively for authors and stories. I am referring to how you, regardless of your job, need to start integrating the art of telling stories, either if you are selling a product or if you are selling yourself. Today's guest is an expert in storytelling for those two examples. Amy Blaschka has made a career offering stories as a service. From her degree in film to her 3 decades spent branding products, places, and people, Amy has understood the power of weaving a compelling tale. She's a social media ghostwriter, yes, that is a thing, and also a longtime contributor for Forbes magazine. Today, we speak about her work, what makes a good story, and some techniques to create good stories. Remember that if you like what you hear, share this episode and please leave a 5-star review on the link below so others can discover this. Let's listen. Welcome to the show, Amy.
Thanks for having me.
I wanted to know a little bit more about your career and also talk with you today about the topic of storytelling, because you talk a lot about storytelling in both your articles as well as the part of the consulting, the services you offer overall. Can you tell me a little bit about what you do or describe to the listeners in terms of how would you describe what you're doing on the day-to-day?
Yes. So I am a social media ghostwriter, and I help leaders craft their stories to communicate and connect better by magnifying their reach and impact. So I work with them on translating sort of what happens in their day-to-day lives, personal, professional, and then sharing some sort of insight or learning from that, and taking something they say and translating it into a compelling and concise written format. A lot of my clients are founders or entrepreneurs. They're very verbally fluent. You know, they can pitch, they're talking to investors, they can do this, but when they come to sit down and actually, write something, like, oh gosh, they have a hard time. Or they can write, but they're like, I need to go chase funding, or I need to do. So it's a better use of their time to work with an expert like me so we can get their insights down, and then they can share them and share their wisdom. And that creates this great cycle where they are providing value to their intended audiences and creating sort of intrigue. And that's the story part of it, is that it's not simply, hitting someone over the head with facts and figures. It's something that's really in a narrative format, which our brains are wired to really connect with anyway. So I help them do that.
I like when you say that it's creating this sort of intrigue, because when it comes to like selling ourselves or selling a product, we talk about like, oh yeah, the facts should provide all the information you need, or this is our mission and vision statement and things along those lines. But could you talk a little bit more about intrigue and kind of that aspect of the I guess weaving the story?
Sure. So the thing about stories and humans in general is that yes, we have logic, we have facts, we have things, but at our heart, we are emotional beings. Nobody is buying through logic. It's all through emotion. Nobody is, that you just have a reaction. And when you provide a story to someone, you pull them in. You're attracting them with this story. Your brains are wired anyway to want to hear stories. It's as old as time, right? This is the way we've communicated. It's the way to connect with people. And when you do that and you have an emotional connection, if you can trigger an emotional response, and hopefully it's a good, positive response, although you can do the same with something negative, like a fear-based thing. You can motivate someone to action if you look like scare the pants off of them, right? But hopefully you're doing something that makes them think and makes them feel, and it makes them want to do more. It makes them want to find out more about this person that is sharing this story. And that's that intrigue. It's really designed to attract and sort of give a little teaser or taste of who you are as a leader, what matters most to you, how you move through the world, right? And kind of what sets you apart. And the way that you're sharing that through a story helps people better understand you because they're like, oh, okay, I get that. And story is the best way to do this because it doesn't come off as hard selling, right?
Mhm.
It's much more as a softer approach. It's much more of an attraction based thing versus, it's a pull versus a push. So I like to say.
Yeah. Looking at your website, for example, when you describe that you provide services for telling the personal story or
Mm.
personal stories, or I should say career stories, is that the correct term?
That's right.
How can we, what is the first step to start trying to find out kind of what is my story in my career? Or could you describe that concept and kind of like a step toward being able to find that?
Yeah. So I think, particularly a career story to me isn't limited to your professional experience, right? So if you think about you as a human, right, and the events, circumstances, your experiences, cumulatively, personally and professionally, have all sort of lined up to get you to where you are right now and where you want to be. So the career story is a way to weave together that personal and professional narrative in such a way that and this is really important, that you make it very easy for your intended audience to quickly understand who you are, what matters most, why you're different, and why would they want to partner with you, hire you, any of those things that you are intending. You want to make it very easy for someone else to understand.
Mhm.
And so the trick is to find sort of that common thread, to find what it is about you. What is that sort of thing that you can hang your hat on? And I say this as if it's easy. It can be incredibly difficult, particularly if you're trying to do it for yourself. I takes me. I'm a writer, and it's still like it takes a while. So I think, to get to a place where you can recognize and articulate that, you're going to bring in the soft skills, right? So the first one being an awareness, a self-awareness, to really be able to sit back and find some clarity about those things about you. And I think too often we do two different things as humans typically. We downplay the things that come very easy and naturally to us, our gifts, because they do. Because if it's easy for us, then it must not be valuable because I'm sure everybody can do this or does this, right? So we tend to do that. So we discount those things. So we think, well, that's not really important. That's not really valuable, but it is. And you don't know that until maybe you're speaking to another human and you say, well, I just did this, or I thought, and they're like, what? So that's
Mhm.
one of the things we do. And the second thing I think that we do that can muck up our career story is that we try to include everything too much,
Mhm. Yeah.
and there is a benefit to being very focused and to letting go and not mentioning everything under the sun, because ultimately this is what a career story should sell your destiny, not your history, right?
Oh. Mhm.
So it should be really about what you want to do and should completely align and support that with anything that you're sharing, versus, well, I did this and I did this. And it's very much retrospective, looking backwards, which can be important, but it's really more about now and in the future, who you are now and how you can help somebody and moving forward. So, when you have every bit of experience, when you have irrelevant things in there, it's going to confuse people that may choose to read this about you. And when
Mhm.
you confuse people, you lose people, right? That's what I like to say. So, I think people get really scared. Well, shouldn't I include every bit of
Yeah.
experience? Is it relevant? Does it support what you want to do? No, then don't. And it's amazing. It's very freeing when you can get over that little hump of fear and go, "Woo," because then everything makes sense and you have clarity. But it
Mhm.
starts with awareness. It starts with that. And then you can be very intentional, which I always suggest people do, with what you're sharing and how you're doing it. Now, it doesn't mean that, you never mention this experience. It doesn't mean, but what you want to do, if you're putting together a narrative about you, about your career, you want it to work as hard for you as it can, because this is something typically that you will write. This isn't simply a regurgitation of your resume or CV. It's not just a listing again of facts and figures. This is a
Mhm.
chance to pull somebody in, pull them into your world, why it matters, and who you are, and share more about you personally. Because I will tell you, the best performing, meaning the things that were really going to connect with people, are things that are rooted in your real everyday life. I mean, it may be boring to you, but it makes you human. It makes you genuine and real. It doesn't have to be all about, if you're an entrepreneur, the models and the bottles, as they say, all the, fancy, the Instagram worthy, look at me in my jet or my boat or my car or my whatever. You're not perfect,
Mhm.
nobody is. So if you share some vulnerability, if you share some of the ups and downs, that will endear you to others, and draw them in. And that's what you'd like to do with your story, is to draw others in.
That's great. I like what you say that you're selling your destiny, your history. It's kind of working towards that future of what we want to achieve and kind of basing our experience to get to that point. So I really like that as well.
Yes, well, you make it easy for somebody else. You create the roadmap for them to say, oh. And I will say this as someone who's a very nonlinear career path, it is possible to make everything align. You just have to find that common thread. I mean, I've been in travel and tourism. Before that, I was in
Mhm.
branding and advertising. People are like, what? But you make it easy when it's all about telling a story. It's all
Yeah.
about drawing others in. It's all about this. So rather than have somebody guess, because if you make people guess, they'll get suspicious.
Yeah.
If you're upfront and you're like, well, here's why, here's what it is, and they're like, oh, okay, and then they move on and they keep going, and they're like, okay, this makes sense.
Yeah. And since you are a communicator, what kind of advice do you have when it comes to crafting that message? How do we know that we are getting what the true story or the things that people will care about?
So I think there are a couple things. I think you need to ask yourself, what do I want? And you have to have clarity around that. And when you're sharing the story, does this support that? That's number one, right? But number two is, you need to think it's not just about you, it's about those intended audiences. So those intended audiences you're hoping to attract or partner with or whatever could be a client or a customer. Could be an investor, it could be a partner, it could be someone who, a company that you wants to hire you. But you can test those things. You can ask those audiences, or you can simply, if it's content that you're putting out there, right? You can start sharing that, and you can tell by the level of engagement. Is it falling flat? Or is this something that
Mhm.
people are commenting on? Are they sharing it? Are they sending you direct messages? There are a lot of different ways they'll show engagement. And you'll know this, but you can't do this with just one thing and done, like post and ghost and the one and done. It's not, you have to, it's a fluid kind of process, because here's the thing, even if something does resonate with someone, there could be something else that you have no control over that happens in the world, right?
Yeah.
That it's suddenly everybody's focused on something else. So you have to kind of do it regularly and see. And even if you feel like, yeah, I've got it, it's not that you simply check the box and you're done forever with this, because things change over time. And so I think give yourself that latitude to be fluid, to enlist it, and be okay with getting the feedback, even if it differs from what you think it would be. Like, you might, and this happens to me, by the way, all the time, right? I'm a professional writer. I'll write something and I'll think, this is great. Oh my gosh, my audience is going to love this. And I put it out there and it's like, eh, you know, I'll write something fairly quickly. I won't give just like, okay, and not have really any hopes, like, well, it's okay, whatever. And suddenly that's what takes off. So I always advise people to track their level of engagement. You don't have to do what I do, but it's helpful. I have a Google sheet where every piece of content that I share,
Uh-huh.
I'll record and I'll say, like, okay, so not just the likes, but I mean it's relative, like the engagement level. So how many comments on there, and I'll know too, aside from what happens directly on the post, if suddenly I'm getting an influx of connection requests or direct messages, or people are going to my website, or and they're telling me. I think you need to listen. That's another soft skill. You need to be very adept at listening, and not just listening yeah, so you can respond. It's listening with the intent to understand, because I think that is one of the most underutilized soft skills out there, is active listening and doing it for the right reasons. So that's definitely someone. So always getting sort of the feedback from those audiences will certainly help you sort of cull together. And I will say this too with your stories: stay in your wheelhouse, meaning you might have a ton of interests, right? We all, oh, I like this, I like for all these. However, particularly professionally, if you want people to come to associate you as a thought leader in a given area,
Mhm.
then stay in that area. It sounds very common sense, and I use this
Yes.
example because I don't do this, but if suddenly you were to read a Forbes article or something I post that is about, I don't know, blockchain or something, you might go, what? Why is Amy posting about that? Because again, you're coming back to confusion. So when you stay in your wheelhouse and you're consistent, you have clarity, consistency, and discipline. That's my power trifecta in terms of, like, telling stories and using it to your advantage. When you do that, then it make it easy for those audiences to understand. And frankly, for the ones that have no like interest in that, that's okay. Those aren't your people. They'll just fall away or keep scrolling. So this way you kind of build that audience that keeps coming back, and they know, and the new people that find you because you're still posting about, for me, like leadership, career, communication, storytelling, those types of things, they'll, I just discovered you. And you stay in that wheelhouse. It makes it much easier for you, and it makes it much easier for the people that you're trying to attract.
That is very important, because sometimes we feel that we have so many interests and we want to show everything we know about things. And it goes back to that simplicity of the message.
Well, and I'll say this, you can, and I've done this, you can post about something that seems very off topic, but always bring it back to one of your strong pillars, right? You can use an analogy, right? So I could talk about blockchain, but then if I can bring that back somehow, so it comes back into my wheelhouse, then it makes sense. Then there's the payoff of that story, and people aren't like, what? So
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. And you've talked about self-awareness and listening. What are other skills that you think are very important when it comes to our careers that you think people should cultivate more?
I think empathy is at the top of the list.
Mhm.
You know, I think it's in short supply. I think the best, finest leaders are very rich in emotional intelligence, and particularly in empathy. And it's really because they understand, they're more of a servant leader. It's not about them. It's about being able to see something from another perspective. And oh wow, okay, and how does that impact someone other than me? And that their leaders, and Simon Sinek to Oprah Winfrey to Gary Vaynerchuk, who, a lot of people, oh, he seems so very, self-centered. He's like the king of empathy. Like, he will tell you that's like his thing. And it's not about him. And I think that is huge for people. If you can cultivate that and see that and pull yourself out of me, and
Mhm.
because the more that you serve, the higher up you're going to go. It's just one of those things. It's all about value. Whether you're in sales or any sort of role, the best salespeople are empathetic. They understand it's not about them. They make it about somebody else, and they really try to help solve a problem for someone else. So I'd say that is huge. Um, well, creativity and curiosity are probably high on my list, but I think aside from being someone who says I'm a creative, I think just creative problem solving, right? So that is a way to do it. And along with that, I'd say adaptability, which, boy, 2020 was probably a masterclass in adaptability for most people, right?
Definitely.
The
Yeah.
pandemic, you had to be able to figure it out, even if you don't like change. Either you chose to change, or circumstance dictated that you had to pivot in some way. So I think adaptability is good when there's obviously a pandemic, but certainly not being too stuck in your ways, to have more of a growth mindset where you can sort of learn from something, even if there's a misstep, and be like, okay, and you have some intellectual humility along with that. Like, that's okay. I don't need to be right. I just want to get better. I want to learn, that sort of thing. So I think those are huge. And then I'll tell you, an underrated skill set, soft skill, is time management. And it's not
Mhm.
so you have to be so like structured this and this, but I will tell you what goes along with time management is protecting your time. And for me, that was a big lesson last year because protecting your time means being able to say no. And
Yeah.
it's not just saying no for the sake of being a jerk. I'm like, I'm not going to do that. I mean, I will help anyone, right? But you need to protect your time. You need to say no to certain things that don't align with who you are, what matters most, your goals, what you want with your destiny, right? All those things. So you can say yes to those things that do. And when you are so overly always saying, yes to the things that, don't serve you and are taking up your precious time, because time is a very limited resource, right? You're going to do yourself and everyone else a disservice. So when you get comfortable being able to say no, and there's a nice way to do that. I've had people ask me for things and it's totally outside of my scope of what I would do. Can I do it?
Mhm.
Yeah, but it's not really the highest and best use of my talent. So I always try to send them to somebody who can help them more, and that's their expertise. Or, if it's just I don't have the bandwidth to do this. I'm sorry, I don't have this. But there's a way to do that. And I think as women in particular, we're used to
Mhm.
being the ones that have to do it all and always
Oh yeah.
do it all. And we're people pleasers, and I mean, I'm men too, but I mean, I'm particularly. And you're nodding, you know what I mean.
Yes,
So
yeah.
I feel like, along with the craziness of 2020, protecting my time was my biggest lesson of that year because it kept my sanity too. And it kept me focused. And, protecting your time, being aware, that self awareness to know, is this really, and when something is right for you or it's not, that is huge. So I can talk about soft skills forever. There's everything under the sun, right?
Great.
Let's apply this one and let's apply this one. But I think, somebody that is very high in EQ, someone that is going to go very far. And it's not to say that the hard skills or technical capabilities and expertise aren't valuable. They certainly are. But
Mhm.
man, what a winning combo if you can marry those with the soft skills, then you got it made.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We're both fans of soft skills, so it's great. And I must ask you as well, because I've seen a lot of you publish a lot of articles, and it seems that for you it's come so easy, the writing. I want to know a little bit about how is your writing process? How will you give us some advice of how to improve in that?
That's funny. So remember when I said about those things that come easy to you and you tend to discount them? Like everyone can do this. Well, for me, writing was one of those. I'm like, well, everybody can do this, right? It's not a big deal. So it's funny. I can appreciate that now. So look, I struggle on days too, and it's not that. And this is the misconception too. Is like, oh, okay, so I'll just sit down on my computer and boom, I'm creative, and it all comes. Now, when I write, the best ideas come to me when I'm not sitting in front of my laptop, right? So it could be when I'm out on a walk with my dog, I'm in the shower, I'm anywhere but where this little office that I write in. So I think the thing that has really helped me, my brain works this way. It loves finding connections, especially between very disparate things. So I just learned to just take notes. So I am the queen of stickies. You can't see, but I have a massive whiteboard. I have every color highlighter. I've got pads and journals and all sorts of things. And then I always have my phone. So if I'm somewhere that I can't physically like write something down, I'll grab my phone and an idea will come to me like, oh, that's a new angle on kind of an old topic. And I will just write it. Or I'll be watching something, or I'll read something, or I'll be having a conversation. So my ideas come from ta-da, my everyday world. That's what happens. But it's just like, okay. And when it comes to writing it, I try to have some sort of hook in mind. I try to have, and this is the thing with any piece of content, no matter the format. So if it's an article, if it's written, a post, if it's a video, whatever the case may be, you always need to have one clear takeaway, because it seems easy to you and you're reading what I'm writing because, again, I've made it easy for you. It's one idea. And it probably, if it's sort of a how to get to something, and here's the one idea, here are the 3 or 4 or whatever things to get there. So the structure of it is very intentional. It's all right, here's the idea, here's how you can get it, or here's what you should do or what you should not do. So it's the real world takeaways. So with any piece of content, stick to one clear takeaway, regardless of topic, regardless of what it is. And if there are multiple things, I mean, the rule of threes works in art, it works in writing. People remember things in threes. So if you can give them sort of these are takeaways, be like, oh, I've got this. Like I said, my power trifecta is clarity, consistency, and discipline. It's not too many things for someone to remember. But I think keeping that in mind as you are structuring things together, one clear takeaway, to not meander, right?
Yeah.
It kind of goes along with the people not like dropping the irrelevant experience, but I need to say everything. I will tell you this, people think, oh no, writing a bunch of words, it's harder to write an article than it is. Oftentimes people struggle trying to write less and more concisely because they have to eliminate the fluff. They have to eliminate the things that aren't really aligning. And it's much better. I'd rather see somebody post a 2-line, post that makes sense than go on and ramble for paragraph and paragraph and paragraph. And by the way, if you're writing a short form thing, include some white space to free it up. People will read it. If they see blocks of text, people will probably pass by it.
Yes, yeah.
Make sure to kind of chunks, because people right now, the attention span of folks, even if they're reading, is limited. Yes. So again, make it easy for somebody else when you're doing this. And it starts with just comes back to clarity, right? Having that single sort of takeaway and then just building off of that.
This is wonderful. That's great advice, because it's so difficult when you sit down to write and just think about that one single idea and kind of like filtering down, but at the end it's so much a better product that people can read. And as we enjoyed your stories, and I'll post a link to some of your stories over on the podcast notes. So it's always like the way you write and kind of make a message simple. So it's very, very, I learn a lot from it.
Thank you. Well, I would say one other thing about telling your story, make it in your own voice. So it might be that it's, it seems so easy and effortless when you're reading something because it's like we're having a conversation, right? The way I write is the way I talk, as you see. So you've read some of my stuff. We're having a conversation now. It's not that I'm trying to write at an artificially high academic level, or I'm trying, you should have that consistency of your presence in the written form, in your, in person, in verbal form, all the things. So don't overcomplicate it. Make it like, again, it's coming back to ease, but just be yourself and just pretend you're having a conversation. And how would you talk to somebody else?
Absolutely. This is great advice, and I've enjoyed this conversation very much. Thank you, because there's a lot of great information that you gave today. So certainly appreciate it. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you, or overall contact you or see what you're up to?
So, well, you can visit my website, which is amyblaschka.com. And I'm sure you'll have in the show notes all the consonants of my last name. Because people, where is that? There. I'm certainly, as a social media ghostwriter, I'm very active on social media, on LinkedIn in particular. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram, and I'm on Clubhouse. So if you're there, find me too, and, we can get together there. And then I also have a newsletter that I do weekly, essentially, and that's called Illuminate Me. So it's really it's sharing kind of stories, and it's a little more Amy even than my Forbes articles, but I'll always point back, and I'll always have one single takeaway and theme, and I guarantee that you'll learn something new from that, and I will always have something. So there, it's amyblaschka.substack.com. It's a free newsletter, and I'd love for you to sign up.
All right. I'll have that on the show notes as well. Thank you so much, Amy, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Yadi. It was great.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Hardcore Soft Skills Podcast. I have more resources for you from today's episode. Just go to the website, hardcoresoftsskillspodcast.com, and subscribe to receive the weekly lessons. If you like what you've heard, give us a 5-star review via the website or via Apple Podcasts, and share with others as well. Thank you, and until the next episode.